Welcome to the fine print, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Caleb Teskey, and today, joining me from New York is Bryan Fields, host of the Dime podcast and co-founder of 8 Revolution. Bryan, thank you so much for joining me today, sir.
What's going on, Caleb? How you doing? Good to be here.
I'm doing great, man, and this is awesome. And I want to just say right off the bat, I know I've been kind of a dick on Twitter to you, and so I really appreciate you sitting down with me, man. Thank
Yeah,
you.
listen, I'm excited. I think one of the aspects that I enjoy most is kind of hearing other people's opinions, and I appreciate your takes. And I think it's always good to figure out because I think in cannabis, everyone thinks it's black and white, but really it's gray, right? Like, let's be honest. At the end of the day, like we're still figuring everything out, and I think it's important to hear other people's opinions.
Well, thanks for not holding that against me, man. Because I know on Twitter, especially, I can be kind of a fucking prick.
There's a lot of mean people out there, Caleb, but I know deep down everyone's very nice.
Okay, well, that's a mighty optimistic take. Before we talk anything serious, would you give us a 5-minute life story?
Sure. So, graduated college, had a bunch of ideas of what I wanted to accomplish and what I wanted
Start
to do.
before that, Bryan. Where are you from, man?
I'm from New York,
Oh,
and
cool.
I
All right.
am hopefully in a market by the time this releases that has 3 stores online, but I can't promise that's possible. Seems like it's unlikely, but I live in New York, born and raised. Went to school in Baltimore, studied marketing and management, got an MBA kind of post school, trying to figure out what I want to accomplish. One thing I always liked was
Where'd you go
going
to college?
Towson, Maryland,
Cool. Sorry
right
to
outside
interrupt.
Baltimore.
Yeah.
No, you're all good. Yeah, I went to school outside Baltimore, went to Towson, studied marketing and management, got an MBA after school when I wasn't really sure what I wanted to accomplish and what I wanted to do. But the one thing I always aspired to do was kind of learn and continue the continuous growth. I really like subscribing to that philosophy because I hate complacency. It's something that like irks me at my core. So I'm always seeking new challenges and new problems. And it's kind of probably one of the reasons why I ended up in cannabis, one that is a blessing and a curse, which is cannabis is just there's endless list of problems and opportunities.
Do you find yourself getting bored easily, Bryan?
Yeah, very easily. And I think that's one of the reasons why I aspire to take on new challenges. I think, running certain projects and certain opportunities is fun, but I always aspire for that new unknown and kind of seeking that out.
Hmm. It certainly seems like a Wild West sort of industry to dive into if you're looking for the unknown.
Yeah, it certainly is. Certainly is.
Okay, cool. And you mentioned on the phone the other day that you were big into marketing, and I was hoping we could rip through a couple items I found on your resume, if that's okay.
Let's do it.
Cool. VIP services at Madison Square Garden.
Sure. So that was post college, and I don't know how familiar people are with Madison Square Garden, but it hosts the Knicks, the Rangers, and a bunch of concerts. And what I did post college was I was responsible for the placements of the celebrities on Celebrity Row. I know Madison Square Garden's very famous for the celebrities it attracts for those. And turns out there's a selective group inside Madison Square Garden that helps position those celebrities for the placements.
What, for where they sit during a game or something like that?
Exactly.
To,
Exactly.
to
So
make sure your VIPs are feeling IP.
yeah, and it turns out one of the hard aspects is telling an A-lister and a B-listers where they need to position themselves amongst their crowd as peers is a challenging thing for a kid right outside of college, which was one of the early learning curves that I experienced.
Did you have to tell Spike Lee, like, yo, go over there?
No, Spike has his own season ticket, so he doesn't go through that department. But some of the conversations I had were pretty surprising, right? Some people were they're very nice, and other people were very unwelcoming for what they expected and what they thought they were going to get. But
I
ultimately,
bet.
none of them pay for tickets. So like at the end of the day, like it's pretty nice.
What's the worst seat you could get as a VIP at Madison Square Garden?
It's really not bad if we're going to be honest with each other. Like they're not sitting where I'm sitting. I'm sitting in the upper deckers. So like I don't really know if 5 rows off the court is considered a bad seat, but I guess if you're a big celebrity, you don't want to be sitting behind so and so.
All right. That sounded like a super interesting job, man. And I know I've done events on, certainly nothing on that scale, but I've certainly done some music festivals and a lot of weddings and a lot of events that require that sort of logistical support and coordination to make sure everyone is happy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that I liked most was that every day was a new problem and a new opportunity to kind of solve that problem. And I think that was the beginning of my quote unquote addiction into like problem solving and moving fast.
Hmm. So you're an addict to solving problems.
I think we're all deep down, we're all addicted to something, right? And it just depends on where you align your interest to and what you kind of aspire to push for.
Hmm. Fair point, sir. God damn. I know we disagree a lot online, but I know we've been finding weird places to connect on common ground here recently.
I'm
We
starting
had
to
three
think
in one day, Bryan.
I'm starting to think we don't actually disagree. I think it was just an optics standpoint where like we thought we disagreed, but really I think we're aligned. I
Mm,
think especially in cannabis, I think we both can see eye to eye on the industry needs to change. We probably need to do a better job of getting our regulators and our lawmakers to make decisions that influence the best for the people. And we also probably can agree that people make decisions based on what their own personal benefits are. And
mm,
unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't align with what the masses want.
mm. We can agree on all that. Yep. God damn you, Bryan. Let's go to the next one. Marketing associate, supply chain marketing associate, supply chain, Tech 5, USA Tech.
Yeah. So
That sounded kind of interesting.
that was an instrumentation company where it was really small scale when I was there, and I had to wear multiple hats as we kind of scaled out the organization. It provided instrumentation for quality control for a variety of different industries, pharmaceutical, oil and gas, food and bev, where
So
they're
2011, is this, how far out of college are you at this point?
2 years. I think I graduated college in
What are
09,
you, 37?
35.
Okay, close. All right,
Yeah,
cool.
right there.
Yep. And so what, I'm just curious, like, what is supply chain marketing? What does that job entail?
Sure. So when I started there, it was like 4 or 5 people, and we had one or two clients. And as we scaled up, the needs of our clients kind of varied. So one of the aspects I was responsible for was kind of the purchasing requirements for putting together these instruments. We would kind of put together like a various characteristics and components inside one module and sell that said module to the end customer. So there must have been 50 to 75 different individual parts, and I was responsible for purchasing those parts and making sure we had that to adhere to the schedule of purchasing and to production that was needed to accomplish the
Mm.
goal.
And did you say these are some of these are like medical equipment?
Yeah, they're like
Yeah.
pharmaceutical instrumentation.
And so
Like
what, like spare parts and things like that that you need to do
yeah,
maintenance?
there was like components inside the materials, like small. There were small singularity components, like singular cables that we had to
Sure.
construct together, and we connected those to different fiber optic components inside the instrument with the electronic boards
Mm.
in order to produce an end product that was combined into a bigger unit for
Mm.
quality control instrumentation. It really varied customer to
Mm.
customer, so it was a lot about logistics and operational understandings on different purchasing habits and different lead times for certain components.
Mm. And that is something that oh, let me the AI and stuff was something I really wanted to talk about, but there was one more on here that caught my attention. Lead project manager said you coordinated aspects of 15 trade shows a year. Um, I'd love to hear about that a little bit if you don't mind.
Sure. So that was kind of a continuation of the marketing efforts where we were looking at and seeking new businesses. So that was kind of putting together the team and understanding what was needed to go into these marketing events, which were actual trade show coordinations of the purchasing of the items and then kind of the coordination of setting it up and then tearing it down and then also communicating with the team which members need to be where for which locations.
So you're doing everything. You're coordinating the setup of like the booth and the breakdown. And okay, cool.
Exactly, exactly. And as a small team, you wear a lot of hats, right? At the end of the
How,
day,
how small of a team are we talking?
when I first got started, there's probably like 5 or 6 people, I think, that were there. And we scaled up to like 15, 20. And it was one of those where like people, you needed to be adaptable, right? Some people have those capabilities. Other people prefer to stick in their job lanes. I'm someone who always seeks new challenges. So that was an easy thing for me just to kind of roll into.
And what was the time frame on that scale up from 5 employees to 15 or 20?
Oh man, that's a great question. I don't really recall like the exact time frame. It
Are we
felt
talking a year, 5 years, 10
years,
years?
five, yeah, yeah, between five plus, I would guess. But I mean, those some of those projects take 18 to 24 months to kind of get going. So
Sure.
there's a ramp up period of like conversations and setting the groundwork and then the anticipation rollout. Because ultimately, what you need is the customer to put those purchases in order to scale effectively.
And especially, I know from doing weddings, even on a small scale, 100, 200, 300 people, there's a lot of logistics that go into that.
Yeah, there's
Every
timing
detail
for
has
sure.
to be perfect.
Yeah.
All the guests fucking paid you a lot of money and they want exactly what they want. And the bride's mom is pissed because her wedding didn't go that well 40 years ago or something like that.
Yeah.
And so that seems like a niche where you would have to be fairly flexible and willing to sort of bend to the whims of what your customers want.
Yep, there's expectations, I think, when you're in that type of environment, and I think as a customer, you want to be satisfied, and I think that's on the person handling that responsibility in order to make sure the client is satisfied.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I think that was the quick rip. Oh, Eighth Revolution too. That's the last one. Tell us about that if you wouldn't mind, please.
Sure. So when I was working for the instrumentation company, one of my responsibilities graduated into kind of working us into new markets and exploring those different opportunities. So my responsibility was to attend different conferences and to find opportunities where we could apply the technology to the space. And what ended up happening was I went out to a cannabis event. I cold called all the speakers for the science symposium, ended up connecting with my co-partner
What event was it, Bryan?
MJ Biz. I mean, that's the one
In
to go to.
Vegas
Yeah,
or
in Vegas. So
this year, or have you been going previously?
2018, 2017. It's
Okay,
hard to
cool.
say.
Has it
So
been in Vegas every time?
every time I've been there, yeah.
Okay, cool. This is my first year, so yeah, thanks.
It's
Carry on,
scaled.
sir.
It's scaled like drastically. At the 2018, they were giving out CBD products like left and right, and that was like my first experience of just like eating every single thing that was CBD, and like I didn't even know what the expectations were. I was new to cannabis, and I was like, "This is pretty wild. Like, am I going to get high? Am I not?" I just consumed every single thing I could have, and just kind of fell in love with the industry, the state of it, and decided to forge off a new path with Kellen to try to be a dynamic problem solvers and figure out what we could do.
And was MJ Biz really your first time where you thought, hey, we should maybe dive into this market
Yeah, that was the first time. So I before
in
that,
2018 or whatever you said?
yeah. So
Yeah.
we it was December of 2018, and I would say over the next 6 months, him and I kind of worked through the details of what we wanted to accomplish, and that was kind of the starting ground to position ourselves into the industry together.
And would you care to shout out? I know I asked you about your co-host. Would you care to shout him out real quick and tell us what he does for
Sure.
your
So
business?
Kellen Finney, he's an extraction wizard as core, right? He is a dynamic problem solver and one that when it comes to extraction, he is as great as there is. So a lot of the problems that we solve currently in the cannabis market is current operators or getting operators up and running, and then really locking in the manufacturing process to help them hone in on their numbers to make sure that everything is optimized so that they're not wasting consumables, that they're really honing in and hitting those numbers so that profit is locked in.
And so he's a chemist or something.
Yeah, analytical chemist.
Awesome. You gotta love those fucking dude. Chemistry nerds are my favorite because I don't understand that shit, and it feels like magic to me a lot of the
Yeah.
time still.
Sometimes when he comes in, I can see the light bulbs turning in some of our clients' eyes. And as he solves the problem, they're like, God, why don't you just say that? How easy is that? And it's like, well, it's take someone with his experience
Yeah,
and his
exactly.
understanding.
It's easy if you have 20 years of education and fucking
Exactly.
lab experience under your
Yeah.
belt.
Yeah. He was out in California for, I think he's been in the space now almost 10 years. So he was out in
Wow.
California for a
Out there
while. Then
doing extractions and stuff.
yep. And then he was in Washington for a while. So he's really cut his teeth in the game, kind of doing it the old school way of like getting his hands dirty and figuring it out.
Could I get him on the show?
Yeah, he'd love to. He'd love to
Okay.
partake.
Cool.
Uh,
All right, Bryan. Cool. That was a nice background. I want to sort of transition and ask you how you went from a sort of traditionally, it looks like pretty much a lot of marketing background into podcasting,
sure,
or how and why? Maybe what pushed you into that?
sure. That's a great question. So
Thank you.
we got started 2018, 2019 was when it really got started. We were attending a ton of trade shows as a way of kind of learning about the space and connecting with others and trying to network because one of the biggest challenges when you're entering a new market is you need to develop relationships with the players. It's very hard to get business when in an industry it's not very trusting and with understandably so, right?
Yeah,
Consultants have
especially this industry. That's a great
this
point, Bryan.
because this industry has had a lot of bad actors and have caused a lot of people to make poor decisions. So establishing trust, I think, is the most critical thing, and people want to see face to face. So we were attending a ton of trade shows and networking the old school way of meeting people, and then
Yeah,
COVID
shaking
happened.
hands and a smile.
Yeah, right, kissing babies, shaking hands. And
Do they let babies into the weed trade shows?
they do not, but they do let a lot of dogs in, which is awesome combination. So COVID happened, and turns out you're not traveling as much as you used to. So we wanted to continue those conversations, especially from a networking standpoint. So we started podcasting, and I would say for the first 6 months, Kellen and I didn't release any of those episodes. We kept them internally and just used that as a practice forum. And then
Yeah, it looked like I scrolled back through all of your old ones, and it looks like the descriptions weren't really that in depth. It was just a title and a blast, and I could watch the progression. It seems like over the 2 or 3 years that you guys have been posting, where it's become sort of a full product here.
Yeah, it really started out as something, was like an internal idea, internal project, and just kind of it morphed into something, right? Originally, we wanted to do 10-minute episodes, hence the name The Dime. And one of our
Oh, that's
first
where. Okay, cool.
one of our first guests, he did an opening monologue that was 9 minutes. And I remember being like, well, this is not, it's not really an episode, right? Like this guy's literally spoken for 9 minutes. I was like, so we're just gonna go with this, and ended up being like 40 minutes. And I was like, maybe we'll do like a little longer form as like a way just to kind of
So in your first interview, you decided to shift tactics right off the bat.
yeah, I mean, listen, when the opening monologue guy does 9 minutes, you don't really have a lot of time to ask a follow-up question, because knowing that it's probably going to talk a little longer than you'd
Uh,
like.
can I tell you something, Brian? I had a similar experience in my first interview with this woman from Department of Health named Cynthia Seavright in Vermont here, and I had these pamphlets. I don't know if I got one. Oh, it's the drug enforcement pamphlets. Oh, here we go. Yeah, think marijuana is the safe drug, and I absolutely do think that.
Yeah.
And I was ready to take her to task on that. And I started interviewing her, and 2 minutes into it, I was like, "Yo, I kind of like this lady, and I'm gonna just dial this way back." And actually, so yeah, I had a similar experience where I decided mid-flight on my first interview that like we're not going to take this aggressive tactic. We're going to talk to people, meet them where they're at, and build these relationships so that maybe we could talk about more difficult subjects down the road.
Yeah, I think that's really critical, especially where we are right now in an industry. I think having those difficult conversations is extremely critical. And it's not an easy thing to start, because you have to have two willing participants that are open and willing to contribute in order to have kind of that back and forth.
Mm, absolutely, man. You know, it takes two to tango.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mm,
But we do release a 10-minute episode. So as we've kind of progressed, I've thought more and more about that 10-minute episode. And what we've done is we take that same 45-minute episode on the dime and we release it in a second short form called Cannabis in 10, which is
yeah.
essentially that, Cannabis in 10 minutes. So it's the perfect kind of bite-sized tidbit for those who are interested in certain topics but don't want to commit 50 minutes to an episode. So it
Yeah,
gives you that kind of clip notes.
yeah, and that's something that I've certainly struggled with. And I was wondering maybe if you'd rename your podcast later to like the $50 or something. But
Yeah.
but yeah, for sure. Like with the American attention span the way it is, I prefer to do like I'll sit here and talk to you for fucking 2 hours if you sit there.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to get to know people, and I think it's the best way for an audience to also get to understand what we're talking about and hear some nuanced points of view.
Yep.
But also, you know, 60-second reels are fucking hot right now.
Yeah.
Everybody has time to watch that while they're taking a piss or, something like that. So I find myself very much going back and forth between, oh, do I do these fucking hour and a half interviews or do we do like 20 minutes and throw in a couple of fucking rap songs from the homies in Burlington or something?
It's definitely a tough balance. And I think one of the biggest challenges of the 60 seconds is that there's back and forth in front of that part and then after that. And if you're
Yeah.
clipping a certain section, most people don't take the time to understand the context. And it turns out that's key in understanding what's going on in the conversation.
And that is one reason why I told everyone at the beginning of this project that I'm not going to do clips because I don't want you to feel, and so many people have told me this, especially in Vermont, that they feel like the news has quoted them out of context, or they've done a 2.5 hour interview with 7 days and they've run 100 words of what you said,
Right.
and people don't like feeling like they're either being misrepresented or having their time wasted.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially nowadays, the media, I think, does a very poor job of kind of setting people up for success. I think they do quite the opposite. They try to put people in position that makes it captivating, clickbaity, but also puts that person in kind of risk, which I think is a hard thing, especially in an industry that's got a lot of misinformation, a lot of distrust, and a lot of unknowns, right? Because each state is their own kind of little problem bubble dilemma. And being able to understand all those involves understanding the context of the information that's shared in the conversation.
And here, since you mentioned that, there was one episode you did where a woman talked about, her name was Rena Sherbel, in the episode called Mainstream Media's Disconnect with the Cannabis Industry. That seems like maybe a good segue if you'd care to speak on that episode a little bit.
Sure. So I don't exactly know what was spoken about specifically in that.
That's okay. I didn't listen to it either.
Okay.
I saw the title. I listened to the Kim Rivers, and that was all I had time for. But I'm curious if you remember any of that conversation with Rena and what she mentioned.
Sure. So,
She?
so yeah,
She?
Raina's one of my favorite in the game. She's got an incredible podcast called the Cannabis Investing Network, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I'm very close to it. But if you want to talk cannabis investing, she's the best there is. So, what we were talking about in that conversation specifically, if I recall accurately, is we were talking about the fact that the mainstream media talks about these cannabis companies are absolutely thriving, right? That they're crushing it, that their numbers are out of control. But when you look underneath the hood, they're having issues, right? They're struggling a little bit. And I think there's a big disconnect between what the outside industry believes happening in cannabis industry and what is actually happening in the cannabis industry. So, for example, here in New York, you can ask people down the street who are not involved in the space, how's the industry going? And everyone's like, oh, it's thriving. The companies are making money. They're printing money. But that's not actually what's happening. I think that's the disconnect we were chatting about.
I just earlier today read a story of how they're cracking down on all these illegal shops in New York, which to me is maybe an indication that they're not thriving and they're worried about competition still from the illicit market. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the regulatory environment in New York.
So I don't know specifically which aspects you want me to talk about, but what I can talk about is like the macro framework. Is like as of today, 125, I believe there's only 2 legal stores open, right? And from an unlicensed standpoint, I
Are
think there's
we're talking adult use
correct.
dispensaries? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I think unlicensed, there's 1,400 plus, which I mean, there's a pretty drastic difference. And if you look at it, an everyday consumer is not going to be able to tell the difference, right? They walk into these stores, they're beautiful, they've got all the things you'd expect for in a high end dispensary, but they're unlicensed. You can take credit cards, you can do all these things. So for the everyday
Even in New
person,
York City. So Bryan, I've never been to New York City. I want to tell you that, but I've seen Half Baked and I've seen a bodega. And I feel is that what we're talking about here? And I've actually seen the back of some bodegas that is fully just beautifully built out, even built better than the front. Is that sort of the scene? You said 1,400 unlicensed shops in New York.
yeah, and I don't even think the 1,400 includes bodegas. I think those bodegas are not included in it. We're talking
Right, so it's
1,400.
underreported. You think
I think the 1,400 is for stores that say literally cannabis dispensary on top as like the
there
sign.
are there illegal stores that have a sign that says?
Dude, I was in over the weekend with my wife and we were walking by and she's like, that's a legal store. And I was like, no, it's not. And she goes, the sign says cannabis dispensary.
Wow.
And I went in there, asked, they have all of your favorite California brands are there. So for anyone who's mildly aware of different product categories and different brands, it's hard to believe that a store like that is not legal. And I understand that. It's confusing. And I think what New York wants to do and what they're actually doing is going to be a challenging dilemma. And I think there's going to have to be adjustments that need to happen in order to have the market thrive, because the people who are pouring their life savings into opening up these stores, yeah, they have opportunities to succeed, but there's all these other battles that are making things harder for them.
What types of adjustments do you care to name any specifics?
Sure. So in my opinion, I don't think we should have limited licenses. I think a lot of people are very headstrong about that, about how MSOs particular operate in those environments and how that's unfair for competition. I don't disagree, right? I think we need to open up those licenses. I
Yep.
understand
And
rolling those.
I've seen you mention that before online as well. Yeah.
I think rolling that out in a tiered program is beneficial for all, because we can't just have a million shops open and not enough people to regulate those shops. But again, like I'm not talking specifics. I'm just talking macro environment. I've got also a take that I know is not popular, but I think is beneficial because, in my opinion, the most important thing for an adult use market is to do what, right? Like, what is the ultimate goal? For most, I think it's to transition the traditional market to the legal market, right? We want consumers to buy products from legal stores. That'd be my opinion on what I think is most
And
important.
those guys grow great weed because they have
Right.
experience.
Right. And that's what we want, right? Because the consumer benefits the most. I don't know if you agree with that take, Caleb, but like
I
to
do.
me,
I do.
I think,
Absolutely.
but
You know, honestly, I thought those legacy guys were grossly underrepresented on state regulatory boards and control boards and advisory committees where, we have all these liquor guys coming in and all these lawyers and all these cops and law enforcement. And it's like, where's all the fucking guys who know how to grow this product? Which was something that really bothered me for a long time and still does.
yeah, I mean, the buy-in is extremely expensive and it's very challenging to have that type of capital if you're not willing to show where you got it from. So there's crutches in understanding how that game works. And I know this take isn't popular, but I think in the short term, they should allow MSOs to help help the supply shortage, right? There's a massive shortage of product in the space. And if they turned over more dispensaries, open them up, and allow the ROs for that are medical operators to just help the supply in the near term, you help the consumer,
Well,
right? Like,
what if we just did that with all the illicit shops instead, or not even instead, or at the same time, concurrently?
yeah, I maybe not all, because again, 1400 is,
Sure.
but like, yeah,
Some of those guys are going to be bad actors.
for
I'll put
sure.
that out there. But a lot of those legacy guys are just guys who don't want to enter this market. It seems like, based on my last year and a half of talking to people, they don't want to get in because of the regulatory burden and the overhead costs.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
those guys still have kids to feed.
for sure.
And it seems like if you could identify those guys out there that are acting in good faith, who are trying to come to the market in a and bring their shit to light. Like, a lot of these guys want to follow the rules.
Yeah,
The
but a
rules are
lot
just too
don't.
burdensome for them to make any money.
For sure. And that's the problem with highly regulatory environments, right? Like, we can't, that's just the way the game works. And unfortunately, I don't know how to solve that problem, right? Because it seems like cannabis
I don't either. Yep.
and that's the shitty part, right? Is like, until we make that not as highly regulatory, and maybe there's options to do that. And yes, there's probably specifics we can get into on what to adjust, but like, we're kind of just like chopping away at a real big issue, and it's ultimately not going to solve the problem. So that's a big challenge that I'm not sure how to solve that.
Can I ask you something, Bryan? Have you
Sure.
ever been arrested
Yeah,
for drugs or anything?
cannabis.
Oh, okay, cool. In
Yeah.
New York?
No,
Okay. I was
in
going to say,
Baltimore.
those New York cops are
In Baltimore.
in Baltimore. Oh, shit.
Yeah, yeah.
Those cops are fucked up too.
Uh, yeah. I mean, that wasn't the best experience, but like, you make decisions, and sometimes you make bad decisions, or you make decisions you could do differently. And
Do you think, what was it, a possession charge or something?
yeah, yeah.
And do you think that's a bad decision to possess cannabis?
No, I think the bad decision was smoking in the dorm room. I think that was the
Oh,
decision. I think that was the poor
you were
decision.
getting high in college.
Yeah, in the dorm room, right? Like, I could have just
I
taken
did that too.
I could have just taken my lazy ass like down the steps, and that would have been sufficient. Like, that's where I think like that's the decision. Like, that one's on me.
Yep. I also got high in my dorm room, and I didn't realize I tried to open the window, and you couldn't open it. You had to crank it, and it would open like that much.
Yeah,
And then the central air would just suck the smoke right back into the room, which went straight to the hallway.
yeah.
And yep, the cops showed up and wanted to know why I smelled like weed.
Right. Yeah.
That
Turns
was my
out
first week of college.
Yeah, nah, mine was like, I think 10 days in. It was all right. This was a decision I could have done differently.
Word up. Okay, cool. I would also like to pick your brain a little bit about investing, because that's something I've seen you talk about a lot, and it's certainly something that I've been watching a lot, even though I'm not involved in it.
Sure.
And I enjoy sort of, that's kind of why I watch Twitter, honestly, was because I see a lot of the shareholders talking on there, and I like to hear what they're talking about. And boy, I got to tell you, I try to keep my personal opinions out of the interviews, but it seems like a fucking risky investment right now. We're building on quicksand. Rules are constantly changing. It seems like we're getting closer to a solid foundation, but it seems like, and I know risk is where you make money, but also this seems like especially risky with the still federal, illegal status of cannabis. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on maybe some of the investing side of this industry.
Sure. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It is very risky time. The capital markets are in the absolute dumps. These companies are not thriving, right? As we've talked about, they're struggling in a lot of areas, but I think there are a lot of opportunities for growth. And I think there are a lot of winners that are in the pile today that we can look back on in 5 or 6 years and be like, oh, that was a no-brainer. We saw the writing on the wall. These companies are laying the groundwork for the future opportunities. And one of the things that I've been fortunate enough to do is to pick the brains of the industry's leaders and to ask them how they make decisions. Because I think when you strip away the fundamentals and the numbers and what's going on, and you understand how people make decisions, you can kind of figure out what the future holds, and you can understand, do I want to bet on this horse, right, to make the right decisions with my money to lay those positions in the future for, big growth and coming down the line.
Yeah, don't jump ahead, dude. I got the Kim stuff coming. I'm impressed with some of the guests you pulled, man. Like, really, for the short amount of time that you've been doing your pod, what, 2 years maybe?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And what's crazy is we're booked through the end of the year, right? So like, I got
Are you
guests.
booked that far out, dude, already?
It's crazy, dude. And like
How
I'm
many?
very
How often do you record, Bryan?
try to do it once a week, right? I try to do it once a week, but like life happens. So sometimes two in a week, other times zero in a week, depending on,
And you
how
still
like,
got your other jobs doing your marketing gigs.
yeah, like literally
Yeah. Yeah.
as the world evolves, this is just another way that we've found to market and to network. And it's just kind of, it's opened up doors that I never thought were possible. And people have shared information that they've been very candid with the type of things that they've shared with me.
No, I feel the same way, man. And I feel like pretty honored by that in a lot of ways, man. Like this
Absolutely.
stuff, like 10 years ago, if I tried to do this, I don't think I would have got any of these stories. And people
No.
would have been like, get off my property. You're a fucking cop.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, it really is an amazing time to sort of ride this wave here.
Yeah. As we're all trying to figure out like what is happening and, what the future holds.
Mm. Hmm. So, um, can I ask you, who was your first guest you ever had on?
It'd be Mike Paget.
Tell me a little bit about Mike, if you don't mind.
Sure. So Mike and Kellen were good friends for a while, and I believe when we had Mike on, he was working for Thar Process, and now I know he has a different role where he's lead extraction engineer for the Midwest for Cureleaf. I believe at this time. I mean, I haven't spoken to Mike recently, but he was our first guest, and it was a very easy conversation to have with someone that you're friends with, and just to kind of test it out. And like listening back is pretty cringeworthy if we're going to be just honest with each other. Because like, you develop a style, you develop an understanding. And like, again, like, I
Yeah.
don't know how to fucking podcast. Like, I'm just like talking to a friend, but turns out there's like a format that you go with.
Right. So that's the first time you've ever done any kind of record, like, because I used to have a podcast before this when I was doing stand-up comedy, and I used to do some performing arts. So I'm used to that. It sounds like this was you're just breaking your cherry here.
Yeah, literally had no
Yeah.
idea. But the one thing that we do is that like we try to improve every episode and every step we take. We really try to put the emphasis on that every episode you listen to, we try to make sure it's a little better than the last. And that's the continuous um, promise that I give to the listeners if they do listen. It's still kind of wild that people do listen.
And does your partner have any experience in the podcasting world?
No,
So
absolutely
you
not.
guys just came in totally green, huh?
Yeah, completely green. And like that's why we recorded, I don't know, 30 episodes, just the two of us before. And then we ended up just releasing them just to see. And it was like, hey, should we keep doing this? Like, is it worth it? I don't know. Let's just do another year. And then we just kind of slowly build and stuff
Oh,
like
so
that.
those were the first ones that don't have lengthy descriptions. That was the two of you,
just
and
just vomiting out things together, just taking hot takes after hot takes, just like practicing, right? Like just
mm.
putting reps in to see. So like sometimes I get called like a journalist, which I don't know if it's a good or bad, but like I'm just trying to figure.
I usually go like this.
Right, right. Like I don't think that's what I am, but like I'm just having cool conversations with cool people, like just trying to learn.
Mm. That's just such a wild boy. From marketing to fucking podcast. A lot of marketing guys I've met are not, you know, uh, they're not entertainment worthy, quite frankly. But
Yeah,
yeah, I spent last night and a little bit of this morning listening through to some of your podcasts, and boy, I gotta say too, even some of it's fucking boring content, like talking about fucking strategies for expansion and stuff. But those are the type of conversations that are really going to, have a bear. In 5 years down the road, I think, people are going to look back on that and say, yeah, like we should have fucking paid attention to what these people were saying, and how they're directing sort of their businesses and allocating their resources into various parts of the market here in the U.S.
yeah. They're very sometimes the things they're saying are very telling, but you have to be able to look behind what they're saying and understand how it kind of aligns with their
Mm.
actions. And sometimes you guess will say something just because like that's their rehearsed like response. And I think what's really important is to try to ask them like more specifically about it because in my opinion, like I've gone a bunch of shows, I've listened to a bunch of podcasts. People will say something, and what I always want is the guest to be like, or the host to be like, why? Like, what does that really mean? Right. Like, I know what you said, but like, tell me what that really means. And that's the one thing that I try to do. And it's hard, even listening back to myself. Oh, I should ask the follow up there. I should have pushed a little harder there. But it's challenging in the crutch of
Mm.
the conversation to keep the energy flowing, but also know when to point because that involves like really aggressive, active listening.
Yeah, which seems like the easy part, but honestly, like, I'm watching this all right now. I can see your fucking face. I'm focusing very hard. I guarantee when I go back later, I'll forget half of this,
Yeah.
and I have to rewatch it again because I'm focused so much on like, okay, I got my list of notes here. I want to keep it sort of on track, but I also don't want it to seem like mechanical. Like, hey, tell me about Cam Rivers. I'd like it to feel natural, but I also like to interject those follow up questions, and it is kind of hard to gauge, especially with some people's cadence and the speed at which they talk, or the slow speed at which they talk. It's hard to know maybe when to jump back in with a follow-up question.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And plus, there's a comfort level, right? Like sometimes you can see the body language of others where we've done podcasts where there was no video and it was a complete stranger and I had never spoken to this person before. So they show up, there's a dark screen, and I've got to start asking questions and I have no idea. Am I hitting a touching point or like, is he thriving, right? Like it's just a complete guessing game.
Well, that's why I do the intake call prior, Bryan.
Yeah, I think about adding that, dude. Is helpful. It's really, really helpful.
It really is. And for people, you know, um, there's certain people I would like to like embarrass a little. There's certain people I don't want to embarrass at all. There's certain people I want my guests to be comfortable. I
Right.
want to also be able to ask hard questions, but like I don't know. Like I said earlier, like building that rapport slowly over the last year seemed like a good move because I feel like if I came out here and just start asking all the questions I want to ask, people are going to be immediately turned off by that.
Yeah.
I think some of these questions are hard questions that people don't want to ask or necessarily even know the answers to, but I
Yeah.
think are important. And I do feel like, with certain people, you have to build that rapport first before you can dive into shit like that.
Yeah, I 100%. I think you have to build trust with the industry, right? I think it's not just one person; it's a macro. Because if
Mm.
it ends up being where like you're extremely aggressive in episode one and people don't really know you, they don't know what to expect, and it becomes harder in episode 5, 6, and 7 because some of these PR reps might be like, you know what, Caleb's too hot takey for me, or Bryan
Yeah.
asked those type of questions, and like it's better not to put you in
Yeah.
those situations because
Mm.
at the end of the day, some of these larger companies they got narratives, right? They want to control,
Yeah, and
and they have to be
those,
careful.
and especially when we're also dealing with maybe state agencies
Yep.
or elected officials
Yep.
who also have PR campaign manager or whatever.
So I got a little tidbit that I'll share with you that I haven't shared with
Please, yeah.
anyone else is that in some of the private conversations I've had with leaders, they've shared with me, which I never thought about this, is that sometimes these bigger executives make these hot statements, these hot takes, and it influences the regulators in DC that is listening in a negative way that hurts the industry as a whole. So maybe someone says something in just passing context that gets clipped out, that gets pushed around, and that then a DC person sees it and
Mm,
it makes them angry and hurts chances in other areas moving
mm,
forward. It's just a tidbit I'd never thought about. And
mm.
when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because people don't know what they don't know and they hear something and immediately assume.
Especially, I could imagine in Congress where you've only got 2 minutes to talk, or you're
Right.
on a clock, and you hear this thing chopped out, which is exactly what I was telling you earlier. Why I run the whole interviews.
Yeah.
Why I
Yeah.
don't fucking. I like to do little shorts of people or quote them, but I always will take that to them first and be like, "Hey, I thought this was," and I like to put something that will paint you in a flattering light. Like I'm not
Sure.
trying to snip a quote that's going to make you look like a fucking monster. I
Right.
like I appreciate my guest's time, and in return, I like to put something up there that they said that I liked, that I thought was a good point. But I also think it's important to ask that because even something that you put that you might think is painting someone in a positive light might actually be taken out of context. And I've seen this even with the most innocuous fucking quotes. Like someone will always find a way to take that sideways. It seems
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, it's really easy to do that, and sometimes people don't want to like put the effort in. They just want to yell at somebody, and it seems interesting. But I've done that a bunch of times where like I go back and listen to the episode, and I go, if I clip this one part and I leave these two words out, my God, it would just send them into a tailspin. But of course, I wouldn't do that because, like you said, same thing is like I'm not trying to frame my guest as a monster because that's not even what they said. That's just me being like, oh, I could really turn this into
It's
something.
just going to look worse on you, really.
100%. Yeah, there's a trust factor when you have a platform that not only the listeners but the guests come on. They want to make sure
I,
that there's kind of a back and
I
forth.
wouldn't even say it's a factor. I'd say it's everything.
Yeah, could be.
In terms of, I mean, I know you have some other jobs, but in terms of what I'm trying to do, um, building that trust is everything. Because if people don't trust you, they're not going to fucking talk to you. And then
Right.
they're going to go tell all their friends also not to talk to you. And if those people are in the legislature or in state offices, you're just going to get a door slammed in your face. And then the game's
100%.
over. So,
100%. 100%.
hmm, cool. Oh, we're agreeing a lot here, Bryan.
I told you. I think we're going to agree more than we're going to disagree.
Okay. Let's talk about the Kim Rivers interview because that's what I was building up to. And boy, I just want to say fucking A, man. How did you get that interview? Because that is impressive. And yeah, I'd like to know that first. And maybe we'll disagree on a couple things here, but I'm still
Sure.
fucking super impressed that you fucking pulled that off.
Oh, first off, thank you. Second, I don't really know how it came about. I think just through continuous effort. I mean, right, like Kim's a mega star in the space, and whether you hate her or love her based on all the things that we know about her, I think like she's one of the premier figures in the space, and what her company is doing is one of the biggest in the game. So having the opportunity to speak to her was awesome. She's incredibly impressive from what she's done from the performance standpoint. So achieving that was fun. Was a good conversation. I'm not really sure like what steps directly led to it, but I would just say it's just kind of putting yourself in the right position and just continuing to kind of push forward.
Was she out in Vegas?
Yeah, she was in Vegas.
Hmm. I missed all the fucking famous people. I didn't get to see Mike Tyson or Cypress Hill, and uh, I'd rather see them than Kim. But I would have.
Sure,
No,
sure.
I stop and eat a donut with Kim in the press room.
Yeah, I don't think she was in the press room. That's not where we met her. But I also didn't see Tyson there too. I would have liked to see Tyson. That would have been fun. I want
Those
to
rolling
interview Tyson.
papers suck, by the way. I got
I
some of
don't.
those Futurola rolling papers. They were fucking terrible.
They do good I like Futurola's marketing. I'm always
Their
a big
marketing's great. Those rolling papers suck.
for sure, for sure. But like, listen, like I'm a marketer, so like I'm like, hey, like I like you guys marketing. I'm not gonna buy your products, but like I had to be because like I like your marketing.
That giant TV they had was fucking phenomenal. The guy
The
showed me how he built it all. He like took me around the back. The fucking big dude. I don't remember his name, but
the
he was a nice guy. But
the first time I went to MJ Biz in 18, that was the only company I remember leaving it. Being like, these guys are insane because like, right, I grew up in like a physics, science, and like trade show environment, and like I go to MJ Biz and I'm just like gravitating towards this massive screen and all these people wearing white. I'm like, this is fucking insane. Like, what world is this?
that's what happened to me, dude. I actually didn't even see it. I was walking the other way and I saw it out the back of my and I was like, is that a fucking 100-foot television or something?
Exactly. You're just drawn to it, and you're like, I don't even know why I'm standing here.
Let's go back to the Kim Rivers interview because I did listen to this whole interview last night and you got two parts out of that. Looks like you got about an hour, man. Um, dude, that's incredible. I've been trying to get guests like this, and it's very hard, especially I'm sure you've seen some of my comments about the MSOs.
Sure. I mean, I don't
And
know what specifically comments.
no, but I think you've seen the general tone of my sort of conversation. So it makes sense that some of them would be less hesitant or more hesitant to come on my show as opposed to
Sure.
your show. You seem more approachable to me. You you feel friendlier.
I mean, I appreciate that, right? And then we try to give like a platform for everyone, right? And I think the MSOs are just doing things at a wider scale, and they're making different decisions, but they're also fighting in the same regulatory environments as the smaller operators, and they're just able to navigate those hurdles differently, right? They've got more access and more resources, which has allowed them to do things differently. But at the end of the day, they're advocating for the same benefits as the industry, maybe specific differences they don't want, but they're advocating for the industry as a whole. And I think sometimes that gets forgotten as a general understanding.
Well, no, and I mean, I've had people tell me that, like, why would you even waste your fucking time trying to talk to these people? It's like, well, I'm trying to cover this fucking cannabis industry, and they are a fucking big part of it. So,
Correct.
if I'm gonna cover this fairly, it seems unfair to leave out such a gigantic part of the fucking story,
Yeah. And one could argue that,
regardless of how I feel about anyone who works there.
sure. And one could argue that some of the guests that you had on could eventually be quote unquote an MSO at a later point.
Sure.
And then what? Like, like everyone starts small at some point. Maybe some people get bigger faster, but everyone was really small in the beginning.
Mm.
And ultimately, I think the one aspect we all forget about is that like the way it operates today is not how it's going to operate in the future, right? Like cannabis is currently like a fragmented market by market standpoint. Everyone's got some states have vertical operations, but ultimately, when the walls come down and the big behemoths come in, the Procter and Gamble, the Coke and Pepsi, it's like those are the
Pfizer.
monsters, right? Like those are the monsters that are going to make things way different and way harder. So like,
Hmm.
yes, MSOs have more resources than the smaller companies, but ultimately in comparison to the other behemoths, they're not even they're
Hmm.
not even a titan.
Interesting, Brian. This is another thing I've been saying for a minute because I've been saying, you know, people are so worried about the influence of the MSOs, as I am as well. And I think a lot of those concerns are incredibly well founded. But I think that the MSOs are an intermediary before
Yep.
the pharmaceutical industries and the big tobacco companies step in. And you know, my personal opinion, and again, I try to leave these out, but I think those big Pfizer type companies, Philip Morris, those type of companies are just waiting for everyone to build out all this infrastructure and then go fucking bankrupt in these incredibly overburdensome regulatory environments. And then they can just come in and buy up these beautiful facilities, brand new facilities for dirt cheap.
Yeah.
Um,
And
any thoughts on that sentiment?
I think you're spot on, and I think we talk about like lobbying, right? And are MSOs lobbying for which behalf? Well, I think they're advocating on behalf of the cannabis industry on what's most beneficial for them, as people who lobby do, right? Personal interest always go first, especially if you're the one cutting the check, which I think
Sure,
is fair to say. And I
sure.
think these other companies are maybe lobbying against because they're doing exactly like you said. They're trying to dry everyone up with there's no cash. These companies are dying. Then they come in and they're the bad guys, right? So like I think
Hmm.
pointing the anger differently because at the end of the day, we're all on the same team collectively and the enemy is on the other side. And I think sometimes that gets forgotten because we're fighting in such a challenging environment today.
And I think a lot of that infighting only feeds into the strategy of these MSOs
Could be.
to sort of sow a division, among smaller growers, or make it more difficult for them to operate, and maybe just kick back and watch them fight amongst themselves. That's a bit of speculation there. But you know, um,
I don't think I don't think that they really mind themselves. I think
hmm,
that they're fighting a different game and they're so focused on trying to scale out their facilities bigger and faster and wider. And that like that's what they're tunnel focused on. Things are so hard for them, especially when they're watching their stock price go from $12 to 30 cents. And sure, we don't need to feel bad for those people losing millions of dollars.
yeah,
That's not
I don't have a
that's
fucking ounce of.
that's that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is like that's where their focus is internally. I don't think it's on like harming the smaller operators. I don't think that's really where
Hmm.
they think
Do
about
you
those things.
think though that maybe they should focus more on growing better weed, because I've seen some of the weed coming out of these medical dispensaries, and this isn't. I hate to say this is a special industry. I don't want to make it out to be like some vastly different type of business, but we're not making fucking widgets here. Like
Sure.
you could produce anything on a production line, a nice like CNC machine part. That's no problem. But this is a live plant that really requires a lot of attention and a lot of expertise, especially in a medical environment. I want to say, and some of the products I've seen coming out of these medical dispensaries is just atrocious, and it makes me want it makes me afraid for their patients, first of all, and it makes me wonder, why they're even allowed to have a license. Like maybe we should have a growing weed test, like a driver's test. You get.
Listen, I don't disagree. I think the product quality isn't great, but I think people influence who wins and who succeeds by their wallets, right? So I think that consumer, if they're able to purchase in a wider open market, which is again more of my core issues, the limited license, I think is the bigger problem. I think if they're able to purchase from a wider variety, they can select the product that's best for them. And if that involves a higher quality product, that's great. I think there's opportunities in the adult use world for mid-tier product. I think not everyone needs premium, but I think they
I agree.
supply
I agree,
a
dude.
certain thing. And I like again, yeah, they don't need to make the best product. And honestly, everyone says like that's a negative. I think that's good. That provides opportunities for the small craft farmers to have their premium fit that they can succeed and thrive in. I think that's better. I think that gives a better environment for literally everybody.
I agree. I also think that maybe it sort of gives a cover to people with larger scale operations who are skilled in remediation to cover up their bad growing techniques. Um, and it's just frustrating to me. It seems like a lot of these companies have focused their attention on sort of real estate acquisitions as opposed to learning how to produce the product that they're trying to sell. And I believe that's been very detrimental to their business model, and is a prime factor in why we're seeing a lot of these, even these big MSOs, like not being profitable right now.
I mean, could be for sure, right? And I think it's specific by specific, but it also could be like the OpEx costs, right? Of building out these infrastructures on a state by state standpoint. Like having a lot of skilled workers scale up really fast to large scale cultivations is probably not the easiest, right? And I can't speak confidently about running a large scale grow because I've never done that, but I would assume that having multiple large scale grows like that is challenging, and having the turnover and having not the capital you need, and then having to take that person, put them in a new facility in a new state, I think those are challenges. And I think as we get more experience and the industry grows out, I think people will adapt, will use more technology, will have more experienced labor, and I think the expectation then will be that the product should rise. And if not, I think that'll weed out the bad growers, and that these companies who right now are running 6 or 7 different companies under one umbrella as a vertical should just focus on what they're good at, right? A core competency is good for everybody in the industry. And right now they're forced to do everything, which means product quality likely lapses.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Fair. And boy, do you think like I'm going to come with another personal opinion just because I like the point you made here, and I'd like to challenge you a little because I believe that some of these companies have entered the market at too elevated of a position without necessarily the quality of product they need or the customer base. They enter these markets. It just, if you build it, they will come. But I believe one thing that is being seriously overlooked here is that people that smoke weed regularly like to smoke good weed. And they could tell when the quality is subpar. Some mids will pass off on some like average passersby customers, but the true smokers are going to see that shit and they're going to tell everybody. And you know, um, hmm, I got a little lost in that one, but boy, I'd really like to see more investment being made in growing a quality product and less investment being made in stretching out your footprint. Like figure out how to do it small first. When you could do it small and there's the demand, then you could scale up. Yeah. Thoughts on that, Bryan?
That's the game we're playing, right? Like some horses want to grow wide and fast as possible, and other horses want to hone in on what they're good at. And I think both those companies have a chance to succeed. And I think that's the beautiful part right now is that smaller company that puts that perfect craft into growing premium flower, I think will have a mainstay in the environment because Caleb, once you try that product, you tell everybody you love it and they're the ones that thrive versus the other way, people don't go there. But there are opportunities where both can work nicely together. And I would say that the person who puts in that love and affection still has a chance to thrive and win. And I would say if MSOs were purchasing or crafting a very premium product, it would be hard for smaller operators.
Dude, and that's what I've been saying too. I was like, if Curaleaf could just figure out how to grow some fire, this would be a very dangerous situation for the
very bad.
Dude,
that would be a real monopoly.
Yo, that seems like their real downfall right now. And the remediation especially, and I have some remediation companies that are going to come on. I met a couple in Vegas. I met an X-ray remediation company and a spray peroxide company that are going to come on and talk about that. But I'm of the mind that once again, if you find yourself at the end of your flowering cycle and you're having to remediate your plant, I have people down there in Massachusetts telling me they dunk the whole plant in 3 separate garbage cans full of, she didn't even know it was in them all.
Horrifying.
Yeah, and that's a medical dispensary.
Horrifying. But
I feel like, how do you feel about this? I feel like medical dispensaries should be held to a higher standard of quality than.
Yeah, I 100% agree. But whose job is that to enforce it? Yes, internally they should have some enforcement, but ultimately people push boundaries, and at the end of the day, it's a business. So I would say the regulators need to do a better job of enforcing the rules. And I'm not saying it's solely to blame, but they're both parties are responsible. And at the end of the day, people make decisions what's best for their organization, and regulators are there solely for that reason to ensure safety and quality to help that balance go forward.
Well, and hey, on that note, dude, I'm going to transition to the last note I have in my phone is about this woman who died in Holyoke, man. which I think ties in very nicely to the point about regulators stepping in and doing their jobs here. And that woman was dead for maybe 8 months before that story hit the news, or before the Massachusetts Control Commission was even notified about it. Um, and I got to tell you, Bryan, like I know I busted your balls a little bit. I wish you would have asked Kim about that in the interview. I know what you said. She probably wouldn't give you an answer, and I bet you're probably right about that. But I would have liked to hear you ask about it. And I also, let me pose this hypothetical to you. Like, does it seem disingenuous at all? She made a couple quotes, man. She said um, something about how important it is as a woman to be able to empower other women in this workspace. You know, a year ago they got a dead woman on the floor in one of their facilities. Does that strike you as hypocritical at all? And if you interviewed her again, would you ask her about it for me?
So let's just separate those two questions.
Yeah,
So let's
sorry, that
dive.
was a lot. Sorry.
Yeah, just want to make sure that I answer them correctly. So the first one about why it took 8 months, I have no idea, right? Like that seems ridiculous. I'm not sure what their protocol is, and I would like the Massachusetts Commission to explain how something like that could happen, because I'm pretty sure that's their responsibilities, is sharing those information. So one, I'd like to know that specifically before. And then why I didn't ask him is that's not really our theory, our style personally. Sure, would that have been a question that I know everybody was on their mind, but there was a lot of other questions that we really wanted to focus on and really want to get the answers to. Because in my opinion, when I thought about that, like the adult use for the Florida and the home grow, I thought was more critical. Asking her about operating a limited license, I thought was more critical, and pushing on those areas that really speak to the type of conversations we have. I
And can
thought,
I tell you, Bryan? I want to say this. I enjoyed the fucking interview, man. There
I
was
appreciate.
some really thoughtful stuff in there, and I hated to single out this part,
No, it's
which is
fair.
why I led up to it slowly. But I was super curious about this because that's a tough interview to get. First of all, I mean, they ran her out of a dispensary down in Massachusetts. Like,
Sure. But the
yeah,
optics of that, I think the optics of that again, like I don't know exactly what happened there, but I did see that photo. And I think like at the end of the day, like there's ways that, I would handle things differently than her, but that's her decision to make. And at the end of the day, like that's how those things go.
does it bother you at all that her husband is locked up on, in federal prison for bribing public officials?
Does it bother me personally?
Yes.
I mean, people like make decisions. Do I think that that was wrong? Absolutely. But like, that doesn't bother me personally on those things. That was a decision that happened. Everyone's aware of that. And that's, not my course of action. I didn't make those decisions. I'm just kind of the one
No, no, but
navigating.
like, does it seem like they're using this unfair advantage to maybe scale up out of proportion?
I mean, I guess it's easy to kind of put those pieces together, but let's just say like she didn't have that and she was operating at, I don't know, 90 versus the 120. Yeah, sure. I mean, listen, I can see the pieces and how that lays out. But at the end of the day, what she's accomplished in addition to that is also impressive, right? We can separate the two and say one is not correct. We don't agree with
Yeah.
one, but what she's done on the other side is also extremely impressive. And
Look,
then
and
hold on, and
undeniably.
pushing back on the woman for other women inspired. I think the industry can do a better job of empowering more females, and I think as being the sole female leader, and let's argue she probably is the top leader in the industry. I think it's important. It's impressive what she's accomplished, and I think more females should be given an opportunity for those larger C-suite positions. And I think that was the reference of what she was suggesting in that context.
Well, and while she also made a comment about just helping other people, like, get that trajectory in their career, and it just for me that fell on deaf ears,
Sure.
after you just had a woman die in your facility. And I thought the PR statement that they released was disingenuous and maybe heartbreaking for the family to read.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Mm, yeah. And it's like we talked about earlier. When you're interviewing people, it is sort of hard to gauge, because there is certain questions that I know if I ask someone, they're absolutely not going to fucking answer it.
Right.
100%. And then I'm going to get a weird look and they're not going to call me again. You know?
Or that might be the end of the interview, right? Like you ask that,
Right.
and then after that, the answers go
Right.
from 5 words to 0 words, and like,
Right.
I mean, when that turns, and
Right. Right.
we
You can
decided to,
feel it. Yep.
yeah, and I went in knowing there were certain questions I really wanted to ask, and I asked her to clarify, right? The Florida adult use home grow I thought was very critical, not pushing social
Did you
equity.
talk to her before the interview a little bit? You do a
Yeah,
background call? Yeah,
we
cool.
had spoken a little bit, but we didn't go through
See,
specifics.
it does help, doesn't it, Bryan?
100%, 100%.
Yes.
But we didn't go through specifics, right? I wasn't like, hey, I'm going to ask you about X and Y. We just talked macro because I wanted to get a feel for which topics that she wanted to talk about and which one she didn't. More so from the standpoint of like, where can I push to learn more? I've seen every interview she's done, right? I know the conversation style she has. I know the mottos and the words and the phrase she puts out, but I wanted to dig underneath because I wanted to understand how she makes decisions and what her role is at True Leaf. So that one of the things you asked me for is about like the future horses to bet on is like, I think the most impressive thing is that like what she's doing with the hub and spoke model is not what anyone else is doing. And she is already, let's call it severely ahead of their peers when it comes to infrastructure and understanding how that goes.
Do you want to explain that hub and spoke model, the elevator pitch, real quick?
Sure. So currently what happens in cannabis is that people like dive into as many states as possible, right? So what you see is you get like that MSO with like the US map and you get like highlighted, like we're in like these 15 states. That's great today. But turns out when interstate commerce comes, game becomes different. Economies of scale becomes a real thing. You need large scale facilities distributing across the United States, not 9 different cultivation facilities that are tiny in the Northeast. Seems kind of stupid, resource wise, personnel wise.
She did mention that they had some smaller scattered assets, I believe was what she called them, scattered assets that really just didn't make sense.
Right. And I think that's one of the things where she got a lot of pushback from like some of the firings that happened, I think, in Arizona. But I mean, if you think about it, she did a large scale acquisition. They had a redundancy of assets and personnel. And what happens when you purchase a large scale company, you bring them together, is you have to jet send the ones that don't make sense. And sometimes you have to make financial decisions that are hurtful to employees. And at the end of the day, it is a business.
Why not just not acquire that company?
Well, I think because your goal is to grow the biggest empire you can, right? Like that's what these companies
does that sound like greed?
Yeah, but isn't that like how the world works?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, like we're not, this is how the game is played by everybody. Like,
I just hate that part of it.
Yeah, it stinks. But
it
again,
seems like this market has plenty for everyone. And that when these big players come in, and she even talked about this. She said, we've had seen a number of cannabis companies get so big so fast, and from where we sat with no necessary rhyme or reason as to why they were going into these markets or what their long-term vision or strategy was. And just 2 minutes before that on the interview, she was talking about how some of their long-term strategy has caused them to have to pull out of some of these markets that didn't make sense. So it sounds like she at one, in one breath was criticizing people who get too big too fast, and in the next breath was admitting that they kind of did some similar activities.
Sure, I think there's growing pains, but I think without like just putting her words in her mouth, what I'm assuming is that like the example I gave with like the Northeast corridor where like someone's got 5 cultivation facilities, she's envisioning that in Arizona, they've got one central hub where they can do cultivation and hit all the surrounding states. And she knew there were smaller cultivation facilities around there that didn't make sense economically because they wanted to have one central hub to hit all these others. So yes, it was part of buying and separating, but that was necessary given the framework of how the game works today, right? Because she's playing the rules of the game, how the regulators have made it state by state and has to adjust those based on what's going on. So yes, there's opportunities to do a better job, but everyone's trying to grow at the speed of light. So there's going to be learning curves.
It did seem like she was also trying to lobby the Florida, maybe the Supreme Court or something for what was this? They're trying to allow the medical market license holders to immediately acquire adult use licenses or something to that effect.
Yeah, so she wasn't the only one to tell us that. I had Brady Cobb on who also spoke about that.
But they spent about $15 million, it seems like, pushing that initiative in Florida.
Yeah, she's trying to push adult use, right? She wants them to turn on, and that's the singular focus. And I think one of the pushbacks that they got was that home grow wasn't included in the original bill.
Well, my pushback is that they already control so much of the medical market. If the medical market is going to get the adult use permits, now they immediately control a quarter of the adult use market as well.
100%. I mean, there's no denying that, but they're not the only ones operating in there, right? All the big players are operating.
25% of the fucking 100% medical market in Florida. Yeah, listen, that's a pretty good chunk.
Caleb, if you were in charge of True Leaf, you'd want the same thing for your company, right?
Brian, and this is another fair point that I'm gonna fucking agree with you on. Like I've said the same shit about being Donald Trump or something. Like I can't promise if you gave me that much money that I wouldn't be the same exact type of fucking asshole.
Yeah,
So I don't mean it's even say asshole, but like sort of just trying to take over. Like I feel like if you gave me that kind of money, there is a chance that I could turn into that type of person.
right. And at the end of the day, I think this is important to remember is that she doesn't work for the cannabis industry and she doesn't work for you or me. She works for the shareholders, right? And she has to operate on behalf of what's best for the shareholders. And whether we can agree with that or not, that's just ultimately how people make decisions who are the executives of publicly traded companies.
Which is
So
wild because it's still federally illegal, and
it's
somehow.
the whole thing is wild, right? The
So
whole game is
so does
pretty
this
wild.
work all because they're listed on Canadian exchanges?
What do you mean all listed? Like how
Well,
are
I
they?
mean,
They're
like,
on the OTC, which is like a pink sheet exchange, I think.
so how does that work? Because here we are, people still can't fucking get loans to start companies. Meanwhile, these MSOs are raising a ton of money in the stock market.
I don't know. I like
Okay,
that.
cool. Do
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
anyone that does know? Because I'd like to ask that person.
No, I don't. I mean, that's a great question. Like, I don't know. I don't know how those work. I know there's talked about getting them uplisted on the TSX, which I don't really know what
Yeah.
that changes. I know that there's hope for opportunities in the future to be uplisted, but like, this is just kind of theories where like I know the ideas in principle, but like I don't really know how that would work.
Can you tell me what uplisting is?
So that I think that's where they go on the Nasdaq, which is where the biggest thing is. Like once they get on the Nasdaq, the people who can only invest right now in the cannabis companies are not like a hedge funds and the mutual funds. They're like the retail investors, like the everyday investors, how I think they're described. And once they're uplisted and they're on the Nasdaq or they're on bigger exchanges, everybody, including mutual funds, can invest in it, which we expect will push the stock prices way up.
Hmm.
But
And
everyone should do their due diligence before investing. I don't want to be like crushed after this because they got crushed in the market.
and I want to. This is my last question. I'm out of shit here for you, Brian. But one of the things I wanted to ask you was about some of these investors because it seems like. And look, I want to say this. I want to preface this by saying I'm not a fucking investor. I don't come from money. I don't really. I know what I read, and it seems like a lot of suckers out here who are placing bad bets in companies that are poorly run, poorly managed, poorly. They have a poor product, and it's federally illegal. That's a whole other thing. Have you watched any of these? Like I told you earlier, I watched some of these Twitter, some of these groups of traders, and they're all screaming. They're screaming at Chuck Schumer because he didn't pass the Safe Banking Act, and it's like that seems like a little bit of projection, and maybe I don't want to take responsibility for the way I've gambled my money.
I mean, I think spot on. And I think, if you go to the craps table and you put all the money on the board and the board burns, like it's easy to yell at the person who rolled the dice, but ultimately, like you made the decision. And, unfortunately, as adults, you make adult decisions and sometimes they aren't the best. If you want the bull case, I can give you the bull case on what I think happens or what is necessary
Please.
to happen is that, like, the way the companies operate today is given extremely challenging financial markets and regulatory environments, and eventually, all of these restrictions will be loosened and they'll be able to kind of thrive a little more aggressively. And I think it's getting in at what is likely the very low or hopefully near the bottom for all these companies. And the expectation is that as things evolve, 280E is removed, which I think is a massive catalyst. I think once that's gone, I think you'll see a lot of other companies have a lot more cash and opportunities. Plus, I think this idea of growth at all costs is going to go away now, right? We've seen it now where we're going to stop going in all states. We're going to really start honing in on our numbers and our internal optimization. And I think that'll be a big opportunity for companies to grow.
The growth at all costs thing, I don't think is working. I
mean,
think
it's a fun
I
game
think
in the beginning.
it wasn't fun for me. I didn't enjoy it. But I imagine as a venture capitalist or someone like that, it's super exciting. But for me, like watching people that don't know how to grow weed try to inject themselves into a market where some of my friends have been grinding for 25 years and perfecting their product, and now have an advantage just because they have more money, and maybe some of these guys got raided by the feds.
Sure.
There's been a lot of that, and just and after watching my dad get arrested by the feds when I was 7, for smuggling hash, and he was on a larger scale, so he kind of had that one coming. But you know, hmm, I would have liked to see more legacy incorporation here, man. I feel like those guys really have it figured out. And, if any of the MSOs are listening, you guys should have hired some of those fuckers.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, listen, I'd love to see that marriage continue to prosper, and I hope as the game continues to evolve, I hope that people who are currently legacy feel more comfortable with coming to the legal market, and I think there's a good marriage there. And I think ultimately the person who benefits the most is the consumer, right? Like to get the access to those type of products is the one who's currently
That's me.
suffering now.
I'm
Yeah,
a customer. Now you see why I'm so passionate. I
me
just want.
too. Me too. Like, and that's the biggest challenge, right? Is like right now, New York is doing things quote unquote our way, and we can all agree that it's good, but also bad, right? And the person who's suffering right now most is probably the consumer.
Hmm. And the consumer was supposed to. The whole point of this was so we could get a safe and tested and regulated product, and it doesn't even seem like we can get that in a lot of places. I'm seeing testing results popping for fucking all types of mycotoxins and different molds and yeast, which is a bummer because that was the whole premise, right? Was the safety element.
Yeah, but unfortunately, you have people who don't know what they're doing, making decisions about making decisions on behalf of an industry. It just seems to be a compounding problem. But fortunately, we are moving in the right direction slowly, but progressing in the direction we all hope is, yeah, forward.
I'm gonna leave it right there, Bryan. Uh, yeah, Bryan Fields, host of the Dime podcast, Eighth Revolution. Was that it? Yeah, Bryan.
That's
I
it.
want to thank you for your time, man. I always leave the last word for my guests. If we missed anything, any shameless shout outs or plugs you want to throw in here, thank you again for your time, dude. I hope we could do this again sometime. That was fascinating.
Yeah, I had a great conversation. I would say if anyone has questions, I think I'm open on Twitter. Come find me, Bryan Fields 24. I'm always asking questions because I'm always trying to learn. And I think one of the things that is really important is kind of hearing experiences from other people and understanding, what specifics going on, because it's impossible to know specifics in every market. There's so many nuances. And I think just continuing to share information like you're doing, Caleb, is a really important thing. And I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Bryan. It's been a pleasure, man.
Thanks,
Good
man.
luck with everything.
You as well.